Greetings, welcome to another of my hip hop discography ranking videos. Today we're going to be looking at Mr. X to the Z, Xzibit. Now, Mr. Bit, Mr. Last part of the alphabet, was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, moved to Detroit, Michigan at a young age, then to Los Angeles, California as a teenager. And it's kind of more associated with the West Coast scene, particularly with his strong ties to Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg throughout his career. And yeah, it's always kind of partially due to that association, has been was certainly quite a mainstay for the late 90s, early 2000s commercial hip hop boom, if not necessarily the main top person at any one time. Certainly being associated with the big players kind of helped and hindered in a way. It's such that he's pretty much most well known for his Pimp My Ride TV series than his actual music, which is a shame because as a rapper he's certainly always been very capable. Not too wordy necessarily, but certainly brings some great lyrics when he needs to. Has great charisma and aggressiveness throughout his lyrics, and just has a pretty standard discography, all things considered, with some really strong stuff in there that really kind of encapsulates that time of hip hop. So to begin with, we are going number 7 on our list, Full Circle, released in October 2006 under Koch Records. Kind of the first independently released album of Xzibit. At that time, Koch was kind of like the major independent record label, and so by this point, I mean, this wasn't an album that did particularly well commercially, and was kind of the end of Xzibit's mainstream career in a way. And for this album, we have the executive producers are Xzibit, Jelly Roll, who produces quite a bit of the album, and Keith Shockley of Bomb Squad, Public Enemy fame. And it's interesting to note that he's as an executive producer of this album, someone like that, you would expect a bit more of a perhaps bombastic, quite, when you think of Public Enemy at least, but with this album, it's quite bland all in all. Fairly run of the mill mid 2000s hip hop. Not to say that there aren't good moments on it. We have some moments of Xzibit looking at the relationship between the police, Rampart Division, where he looks at kind of tells from the perspective of a corrupt police officer, which is an interesting take. Black and Brown, which just has an overall look at the prison population, largely being black and Latino people. On Bail, nice catchy track with The Game, Daz Dillinger and T-Pain on it. Again, another kind of prison related track. And one of the only times at this kind of period that T-Pain did a chorus with no autotune on it, which was interesting. Lead single Concentrate is interesting for its Buddhist mantra that kind of plays as the basis of the track, and for the word rhyme scheme that Xzibit plays off of Concentrate. But the track itself isn't, but beyond that, it's not too much to it. It's a fine single, if not necessarily spectacular or anything like that. And then apart from that, Corrupt appeared a couple of times. Too Short, DJ Quick, King T make appearances. Jelly Roll makes vocal appearances as well. Say there's not a lot else to the album. It's nice and short, at least, as Xzibit's albums do tend to be. But in terms of standout moments, there isn't a lot on here. So we go number 6, Napalm, released October 2012. Another independent release, just under Xzibit's own open bar entertainment, where a lot of Xzibit's work would come under, but without any sort of major label backing for it. So again, not an album that did particularly well on the charts, but there is certainly a sense of him trying to recapture some of that mainstream appeal that he had in the early 2000s. A huge guest list on this album: The Game, Prodigy from Mobb Deep, Wiz Khalifa, Crooked I, Slim the Mobster, Bishop Lamont, Be Real, E40. The lead single, and title track Napalm, featuring Travis Barker on the drums, and this is quite a heavy track, as you would expect for Travis Barker to be featured. It's cool as well that it features a bit of a in the third verse, like a kind of dip in this, where it gets a bit more calm and then builds up again towards the end of it, which is quite cool to hear. We also have 1983 kind of standout track, dealing with that being the year that his mother passed away, and just kind of having a look at his life and career, just reflecting, which we do get a fair bit of throughout the album as well. It's kind of a combination of that and just general early 2000s hip-hop vibe, particularly with the stellar production as well from the likes of Dr. Dre, David Banner, Akon, S1, 1500 and Nothing, Rick Rock, Illmind, Focus, who produced the closing kind of sister tracks, I Came to Kill and Killer's Remorse, which the first track looking at the mind of a killer, and then the aftermath, no pun intended with the Dr. Dre link, and just the remorse of nothing left afterwards. And it's a cool collaboration as well between himself, Be Real, Demrick, and Bishop Lamont, which would help spawn the Serial Killers group with Xzibit, Be Real, and Demrick. Same Bishop Lamont didn't get in there as well, but they still sound great together. We have Movies earlier on, which is another big collaborative track, which has a movie punchline feel throughout a lot of it. So there's definitely some great moments on here. A bit crowded at times, and a bit lengthy as well, but still, all in all, a nice way to kind of try and recapture that early greatness of Xzibit. Number 5, At the Speed of Life, the debut from Xzibit, released October 1996. Like releasing things in October, under Loud Records. With it being his debut, it certainly feels quite low budget and underground, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, um, but it does make it a little bit tricky to differentiate stuff throughout it. Production, which is largely helmed by E. Swift and Theod Orser, um, doesn't differentiate too much throughout the album. There's quite an underground feel, and interestingly, more of a New York underground feel. It seems for a lot of it, with that kind of scratch chorus style and that kind of thing, particularly exemplified on tracks like Eyes May Shine, which features a vocal sample of Prodigy from Mobb Deep, and it's kind of a highlight track of the album, particularly of that style of track, which we do get quite a lot of. Also, we get sort of the middle section of the album seems to be the singles part of the album, because this is where we get lead single Paparazzi, which does sound at least a bit different from the other tracks, with its classical feel to it, and Xzibit's chorus, strong, of looking at artists who try to get into the rap game strictly for the money and the fame and fortune, which is a bit cruelly ironic considering hindsight, Xzibit being more well known, perhaps arguably, for his TV work than his actual music. But that's by and by. Following this, with the DJ Muggs produced Foundation, dedication to his young son. But as I say, apart from these moments, Xzibit does manage to showcase himself well in this debut, but it is a bit low and difficult to differentiate between tracks when they do have quite a similar style and sound throughout them. But still a decent debut anyway. Number 4, we go in Weapons of Mass Destruction, released in December 2004, kind of like the final major release of Xzibit's under Sony Records. With the title Weapons of Mass Destruction, and like with tracks like the opening State of the Union, there is a bit of a worldly American politics theme, not necessarily encapsulating the album. There's certainly bits of it which have a slightly more political feel than some of his older material, but not enough to necessarily classify it as a political album. Certainly the Xzibit way is quite often to have a particular aesthetic for an album, but not necessarily have it featured that heavily throughout the album or anything, which is fine, because the album itself just kind of is in a way to kind of keep building on Xzibit's fame with the Pimp My Ride series, and to try and recapture some of the West Coast sounds that perhaps got lost on his previous album, as we will get to. The producers like Jelly Roll, who appears again, Rick Rock, DJ Khalil, High Tech, Mr. Porter, generally bring a bit more of a traditional West Coast sound to a lot of the album, and there's certainly a lot of it which kind of deals quite explicitly with just West Coast street life, as opposed to any particular thing. So just kind of a more general West Coast album, I feel. Lead single Hey Now Mean Muggin' featuring Kerry Hilson, produced by Timbaland, a very strong Timbaland banger, but with a bit more of a West Coast sound than a traditional Timbaland track. a highlight song, Scent of a Woman, produced by High Tech, looks at a relationship, presumably between Xzibit and his wife, and just the the growth and maturity of said relationship, with Xzibit, starting off not particularly interested in commitment or anything like that, and then just growing and, as I say, becoming more of a mature person with her, and the chorus changing kind of each time to reflect that development. So, particularly for that kind of track that we often get on hip hop albums, to have it played out in that kind of style and tone is quite interesting to hear. Conceptually, just one of the stronger tracks I feel of Xzibit's discography. There's not too heavy in terms of guest appearances either on this album for an album of that era. Mainly a couple of appearances from Strong Arm Steady. Busta Rhymes collaborates with him on Tough Guy. Jelly Roll again appears a few times vocally, and that's kind of it really. It's largely Xzibit's show, which I guess is a good way to keep showcasing Xzibit as an artist rather than letting too many other artists overshadow or influence the album in any way. So yeah, it doesn't differentiate too much in terms of styles. The only real change, I suppose, is the more gospel influenced Judgment Day. But it doesn't. All the songs are generally well produced and bring that style well. So yeah, it's not. It doesn't need to divert too much. I feel. And so move on to number 3, 40 Days and 40 Nights. Released August 1998. This album does feel like a bit of a bridge between the underground Xzibit and the more mainstream Xzibit, as quite often the case is with a particular artist. This being released between after the debut At the Speed of Life and the future albums that will be released later. There is kind of a feel of the mixture of the more underground sound along with the more recognisable West Coast sound creeping in. I mean, notably, in terms of production, we get tracks produced by Mailman, Chris the Glove Taylor, Butter, all who have been co-producers of Dr. Dre's at around this time, or in the in the history. A lot of them is Sir Jinx, who is Dr. Dre's cousin and is a go-to producer for Ice Cube. Superfly, who's always had quite strong links to Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. So I wouldn't necessarily say that working with these producers was a way to get Xzibit necessarily closely associated with Dr. Dre, but it is an interesting bit of foreshadowing in terms of the relationship that Xzibit and Dr. Dre would have for production. So I think that we have that. In terms of other sounds, the opening song, chamber music, quite a heavy cinematic, almost Wu-Tang sounding style. So again, still having a bit of an East Coast sound, but we're dragging more of the West Coast sound in as we go on. Lead single, What You See Is What You Get, with its one-take video, plays out quite similarly as a song. It's just kind of extended verses from Xzibit with the chorus and bridge in between, um, which Xzibit just plays out really well. It's quite pacey and flows really well throughout. We get a collaboration, Pussy Pop, with Method Man and J.O. Felony. Again, not too many collaborations on this album. We get Let It Rain, collaboration with King T and the Alcoholics towards the end. Inside Job, which features Xzibit getting taken by the police for a job robbery that he may or may not have been involved with. We get a nice skits at the end of Xzibit in jail, which is quite amusing. The outro features a nice moment of Xzibit's father talking about him. And so, I mean, generally speaking, it's quite a strongly produced, and Xzibit lyrically is plays out quite well throughout the album. So then we move on to number 2, Man vs. Machine, executive produced by Dr. Dre, released October 2002, still under Sony Epic. At the time, I believe, I'm not sure if they were confirmed or not, but there were supposed to be overtures that Dr. Dre was trying to sign Xzibit from Sony to his own Aftermath Interscope Records, which didn't play out, which then ironic because 50 Cent later, who was briefly was briefly part of the Sony roster, ended up signing with Aftermath and Dr. Dre. So nice little bit of irony there, if all that is believed to be true. You can certainly see with say the strength that the relationship between Dr. Dre and Xzibit around this time, how it would make sense for Xzibit to be part of Dre's roster. Dre produces a couple of tracks on this album and appears vocally, as he does on the other album, which we'll be looking at. Their collaboration, Symphony in X Major, it just brings a strong collaboration between the pair of them, Dr. Dre. We get a kind of a kind of like with the Man vs. Machine aesthetic, we get a bit more of a technological, industrial sense. Again, scattered throughout it, not necessarily threading the album or anything. In fact, the intro release date is a track about Xzibit being released from prison and just wanting to go straight to the studio to record music, which I don't think that Xzibit was in prison at this time. I'm not sure about how much time Xzibit has spent in jail, if any. It just seems to be another one of these intros that Xzibit quite often has as a great way to scene set for the album, but not necessarily play out into the album itself. You could say none of the albums necessarily are conceptual or anything like that, but Xzibit certainly knows how to begin albums quite visually. So yeah, again, throughout the album, we get a lot of the standard collaborators of this time and type. Snoop Dogg appears on the Dre produced "Losing Your Mind." Eminem produces "My Name," which features himself and Nate Dogg as a diss track towards Jermaine Dupri. Um, Nate Dogg again appears on the lead single, the Mr. Porter produced "Bouncy Multiply." Um, Paul Rosenberg, Eminem's manager, appears for a skit, for a similar skit to the Paul's skits that would appear on the Eminem albums. We get the Toto Africa sampling "Heart of Man," Harder featuring Golden State Project, himself, Raskas and Saphir. B2K to LA, Ty 5 produced collaboration with MOP, which is quite heavy hitting, aggressive track. Mine, The Gambler featuring Anthony Hamilton, more of a smoother, reflective track, along with Missing You featuring Andre Dre Wilson Boogie. Again, about his deceased mother. Eric Sermon produces Right On, and then we get Enemies to kind of finish it off quite strong and aggressively, following the Eddie Griffin skits, which happens before it, which I won't say the title of, but it's certainly there. So again, it's a very kind of heavy hitting album throughout, just with a few smoother, softer moments towards the end, but generally speaking, quite a strong, heavy hitting album to, I suppose, go with the industrial technological styling of it. And certainly Xzibit feels very comfortable with this style, and he pulls it off really well. So it's no wonder that he runs with it for this album. Not as heavily West Coast influence as some of the stuff around it, though. Notably the number one album, Restless, which features a much heavier West Coast sound. Released December 2000, again executive produced by Dr. Dre, as kind of like a major start of their collaborative relationship. Xzibit having previously appeared a couple of times on Dr. Dre's 2001 album, and on the Bitch Please songs on Snoop Dogg and Eminem's albums. So he's certainly been established as the new West Coast rising artist. Certainly the intro skit of this album kind of reinforces that idea of people looking forward to Xzibit's project and what he's going to be doing as a new major talent, which again, this being like the commercial peak of Xzibit, only had so much in terms of it managed to go platinum and everything, but it just didn't really go much further than that, which again is a bit of a shame, because the album is well produced, particularly for that time and style. Similarly to Man vs. Machine, Dr. Dre produces a few tracks and makes a vocal appearance as well on the track which he produces with Knots. And so we get that kind of like Dr. Dre synthy, heavy, bouncy style throughout. Lead single X, produced by Dre, Scott Storch and Melman, features this very heavily. and features Snoop Dogg on the outro, using a lot of X words to play with. Similarly with front to back, the intro track produced by Rockwilder, again with a hydraulic car sample that plays on it, and certainly has a very bouncy feel to it. Get Your Walk On, another radio single produced by Battle Cats, again very synth heavy, very bouncy feel, and Xzibit just sounds really animated throughout it, and on his verses. A collaboration with Eminem again, Don't Approach Me, this time looking at their relationships with the public and being in the public eye, particularly Eminem, who at that time was having issues dealing with the public, and his relationship with his ex-wife Kim. Eric Sermon produces again for Double Time and Alcoholic, which he features on along with J. Rowe and Tash of the Alcoholics, or the Licks as they know at this time. In the kind of like the middle section of the album, where we get a lot of the more kind of standard typical hip hop themes of alcoholism, drugs, cars, which you can tell from the tracks Alcoholic, DNA, drugs and alcohol, rims and tires. It all kind of sets the scene pretty well. But we also have other kind of towards the end we get Sorry I'm Away So Much, which is a more reflective track about being away from his young family, featuring DJ Quick and Sugar Free. Loud and Clear, the closing track, another quite strong outro track featuring Butch Cassidy, The Far Eye and King T. Best of Things, another quite heavy hitting Dr. Dre produced track. Been a Long Time featuring Nate Dogg on the chorus. Kenny Parker Show 2001 featuring KRS-One as a radio freestyle sort of track. Overall very well produced, and I say Xzibit sounds really strong throughout the album. You can certainly have the chemistry between himself and all these style of producers. A very West Coast heavy feeling album, and kind of as I say, it's a shame that Xzibit's career kind of plateaued at this point and wasn't able to go much further than it did. Perhaps just being associated with these major artists rather than being able to stand out on his own. Perhaps we get some of this that happened around this time, but Xzibit is still a really strong artist with some very strong albums to go through. These top 4 on the list in particular are all really crisply produced, and I say it's just a shame that Xzibit hasn't had quite the career that similar artists of his caliber may have done. But it was good to look at those again, and hopefully we get some more another time. I'll see you all again soon.